Please ignore this hodgepodge of a set behind me. Where I normally film, the ceiling is flooding, so there's no making a video there today. What is up, Flick fans? Welcome back to my channel. Tim Allen is back in the Santa Clauses. The first 2 episodes are dropping on Disney Plus tomorrow. That is Wednesday. Today, I'm going to talk about the series, whether I like it or not. I'm not going to spoil any of the big reveals, but this series actually has some nice surprises in it so far. So, Scott Calvin is back. After being Santa Claus for nearly 30 years, he's as jolly as ever, but as Christmas declines in popularity, so does his Santa magic. Scott struggles to keep up with the demands of the job, as well as being there for his family. Upon discovering that there is a way to retire from his post, Scott considers stepping down as Santa Claus and finding a worthy successor so he can become a better father and husband. And that, as I was watching, turned into a nice twist, nice series of events that were coming after a setup that does feel like those original movies feel, both the good and the bad. Some of those really overly cheesy and ridiculous moments that, you know, if you didn't like the original movies, if you're not a fan, you're going to watch this and you're going to say, well, it's the same old thing. But in a way, that's good. Look, I really enjoyed the first Santa Claus film. I like the concept of what Tim Allen has to go through in that movie and just the idea of bringing in a successor every time. It had charm, it had magic. It was overly ridiculous. I didn't love the script, but I have nostalgia for it. I'm not going to deny that. The second Santa Claus is cute as well. The third one, we're not going to talk about it. That may have been too much. Even as a kid, I'm watching that going, that's not as good. But I think the word to use for those movies is magic. They each have a sense of charm about them that you don't often get in Christmas stories nowadays. And they do hold up in terms of rewatching them every Christmas. Doesn't matter how much time passes, even though since the first one, there's been a lot of time that has passed, they still have that it factor that you can watch during the holiday season. And that's what I wanted the Santa Clauses to capture. And in that first episode, you're back into this world. You get those magical Christmas moments from Scott Calvin, whether he's going into someone's house, he's revisiting someone at one point who he visited as a young girl, and he's going in to see, and doesn't even realize that there has been so much time that has passed. And also the cliches of Christmas movies. You know, he's making his list, checking it twice. He's going to find out who's naughty and nice. Well, naughty and nice doesn't really work like it used to. There are things about certain kids that could make them naughty or could make them nice, and the ones that some may see as naughty could be that way for a particular reason. So we're kind of flipping some of these conventions on their heads, and you still have those wacky moments. There's one point he comes back from visiting houses, and everyone's celebrating and dancing. There's confetti, there's music happening in the background, essentially a music video happening behind Scott Calvin as he's just kind of like, oh, it's what a long night. I'm tired. So if you're not a fan of the cheese that made the original Santa Claus movies, again, that is heavy in here, that is present. Part of it is trying to capture the charm. Not all of it works within the first 2 episodes, but the first episode goes from back to this world, over the top. Here's Tim Allen. Here is his family. They're living in the North Pole. Everything is fine and dandy. Everything is as we knew it in the first few films. To now, things are starting to change because there's this sense of reality that is hitting Scott Calvin. He's been Santa Claus for a long time. Mrs. Claus has been Mrs. Claus for a while, and they're both wondering, how did we get in this situation? What happened to the previous Santa? You know, no one seemed to be overly devastated that he is coming in as a replacement. No one seemed to be mourning the guy that came before. So is he an easily replaceable guy in general? And if a new Santa Claus comes in here not on Scott Calvin's terms, would the elves care? And so he tries to test that a couple of times in these first 2 episodes, whether it be telling them he's planning on moving on or something like that. He wants to see if they care, but he also wants to take his 2 kids that are living with him in the North Pole and actually give them something more. Allow them to see the outside world because all they know right now is the North Pole. That's interesting. That's a really cool concept. That's when the series for me started to pick up, because as fun as the cheesy moments are and as nice as the nostalgia is for a lot of people, that's not enough for a show like this to thrive. That's not enough to keep you going for 6 episodes. We need more than that. We need more substance. And thankfully, towards the end of episode 1, I started to get a hint of substance. And then episode 2 starts to fully realize that plot line of, okay, maybe it's time to move on to something different. But how do we go about finding that replacement? What do we do? Do we visit people from my past, or do we find someone that we don't know that fits the bill? And a couple of the younger elf characters, they have people in mind, and everyone seems to think that they know what is to come, but no one really knows, or do they? Episode 2 for me worked a lot better than episode 1 because it's not overly relying on that nostalgia. And this is a series that's going to thrive on that, absolutely. But it has to, like I said, bring something more to the table. And I was actually starting to find interest in this replacement plan. And that seems to be the main plot point going forward. We have to find someone because Scott Calvin wants to get his family back to maybe what he knew many, many years ago before this happened in the first place. Okay, if that continues on and it's maybe not leaning into the cheese as much as it did in episode 1, slightly in episode 2, but it does bring that in every now and then to recapture that magic, then I think this series is going to be really successful, and I think it's going to end up capturing the emotion that it's going for. So before I give you my final thoughts after you watch the first 2 episodes, come back here, let me know, what did you think? Could this turn into something interesting? Does it get better as it goes? And if you're here and you enjoyed this review, you want more Disney Plus original reviews, be sure to drop a like, subscribe for more content. The Santa Claus is at its best when it's not overly relying on the cheesy elements. As this new plot thread of finding a replacement Santa develops, the series begins to find its footing, and it could become something magical. As you guys know, I don't like to give a score after just 2 or 3 episodes, so I'm going to refrain from that. Maybe we'll come back and score it once it's over, but I am going to say this is worth a watch. Not a full thumbs up at this point. I want it to stay on track with that emotion, but if it does, and this plot thread of finding that replacement Santa does start to work in that final scene in episode 2 that tells me it may, then I will end up being on the positive side of this. I hope it doesn't fall off and start to overly rely on the older elements, bring in the new, make it something different, but also retain the nostalgia that we know. I've talked too much. I have to go fix a leak in my roof. Well, I'm not going to. It'll be the plumber. Thanks, plumber. I appreciate it.